John Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Welcome to Newsmaker Saturday. It is a day those of us who were around will never forget. 20 years later, tonight on Newsmaker Saturday, we remember 9/11. Through the eyes of two boys, 9 and 13, who lost their fathers in the Twin Towers that awful day. We're going to begin with Andrew Bird. His father, Gary, was killed in the North Tower, the first tower that was hit that day. Andrew is now 33 years old. You were 13 at the time. I guess that would put you in 8th grade?
I was, yeah. Just before high school, yep.
Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. Your father, I believe, was the only Arizonan killed in the 9/11 attacks. Is that correct?
That's right, as far as we know, yeah.
Okay. Andrew, I don't know where to begin except at the beginning. That day, do you remember how you were told and when you first realized there was trouble?
So I woke up to a screaming mother. She was frantic. She was running around the house. It was 6:12, right? And I remember that time. And I woke up and I went into the hallway and I saw her run by. So I followed her. What's going on, right? Followed her into my sister's room, and the Today Show, I believe, was live and showing the footage, right? Showing the footage of the buildings burning, up in smoke, coming down. And I just stood there frozen next to my mother, who looked absolutely horrified. I didn't know what was going on, but I sure remember watching that footage, standing next to her and thinking to myself, something is very, very wrong here. I don't know what it is, but something is very wrong.
Did you know, Andrew, your dad was in that building because your dad had just taken a job at Marsh and McClellan Companies. It's a New York-based global insurance brokerage firm. He had just taken a job to become a senior VP with Marsh and McLennan, but he wasn't going to be based in New York. He was coming home that night, is my understanding, right? So he was there simply for a 2-day training, and he happened to be there on 9/11.
Right. That was his last meeting. And in fact, like always, he was early, right? He was early for his meeting. He went in there for that meeting. And personally, I did not know what was going on, right? 13-year-old boy. I knew he was going away for business trip, just like a lot of other times in the past. And I didn't think anything of it, right? I didn't think it would be any different, right? I thought he would walk in that night, 6 p.m., just on time for dinner, like he always did.
And that was the plan. Did you realize from your mom, Andrew, that your dad was in that building? Because my understanding is your mom checked around, called the company, and they said, no, he's actually in Tower 2.
Right. So that's what she heard, and that gave us some hope, right? That gave us some hope at that time. I knew he was on, I think, about the 100th floor, if I'm not mistaken. But we were told that we were given hope that he would in fact come home that night at 6 o'clock to get dinner, right? And it honestly, it took us a few days. It took my mother, I guess, a few days to realize, this probably isn't happening. He's probably not coming home. It took me, honestly, a few years to kind of accept that fact, to come to terms, to come to peace with that fact, if you will.
You weren't at school that day. You hadn't left yet?
Yeah, we went to school like business as usual, And here's the cool part. As a 13-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl with my sister, we're absolutely not expected or obligated to know what to do, right? Luckily, my mother, Donna, had such incredible emotional resilience, such incredible boundaries with being able to keep it together, so to speak, right, in her own way, that she, in fact, just said, hop in the car, we're going to school. right? We're going to figure out what happens. But for now, you guys go do your thing, live your lives as usual.
You went to school that day with all of this swirling around in your head?
Absolutely.
Wow.
In fact, yeah, it almost didn't even occur to me that that day that my dad might be in that building, that my dad may never be coming back. But there was that uneasiness, that heavy, dark feeling at school, like there was all over the country.
Andrew, this is a tough one, but I'll ask it. When you watch the video of that first plane hitting the North Tower, which turns out where your father was, do you believe he pretty much was killed right away in that instant? Is that your belief?
No. In fact, I choose to believe that he was alive for quite some time. The man was incredibly heroic, right, as I knew him. So I choose to believe, right, since I'll never know, I choose to believe that he was making sure that other people in that building were led to safety to the degree that he could, right? Because that's just the kind of man that he was. So
that is really interesting. We're going to speak to another young man who is 9 years old in a few minutes. He lost his father, but they got remains. Did you get any remains of your father to just verify what had happened?
We did not personally, to my knowledge, but my mother and I did take a trip to the 9/11 Memorial in New York a few years ago. And we actually stood outside of the room where the remains of those that had died in those attacks are being kept, right? And so we stood outside of this room with this beautiful blue mosaic wall, and we just reflected for a moment, right? Because we hadn't had any physical closure with that, so to speak. So we just stood there, and it was peaceful, right? It was good closure for us to know that he's close by,
Andrew, I can tell talking to you that you've come to peace, whatever degree of peace you could possibly reach. I think you've gotten there.
I believe so. I feel it. I live it today, right? As you could probably expect, a lot of stations want to do interviews and get the story and this and that, and that's great because honestly, now more than ever, this year more than ever, this year I'm energized, right? I'm energized, and I've come to peace with that I am my own man, walk my own journey, that I don't have to follow in his footsteps, that his legacy empowers me to be able to tell a story, portray a message, whatever that is, to those that still struggle with this, or to those that are struggling with something similar, right? It's a unique suffering, a unique pain that I have been given the opportunity to turn into strength and compassion and love for other people that need it. So
you went through a tough time, didn't you, with all this? It was tough. It really was it's been a journey. It continues to be as we're all on this crazy journey, but for you, a lot of obstacles right off the bat. And I think having the rug pulled out from under you when you're 13, that's a lot to handle.
Absolutely. Yeah, 13 years old, and the first thing that I did when I realized this is happening is I kind of bottled it up. I shoved it down. I told myself I need to be the quote unquote man in the house. I started getting into, drugs and alcohol. I started, hanging out with the wrong people. I pulled away from my mother and my sister. I pulled away from those that were extending that love that I frankly needed at the time, and withdrew,
That's pretty typical. We're going to hear a similar story in a few minutes from another young man who's gone through the same kind of struggle.
You don't say.
I don't think I think it's understandable, no question, but you came out the other side of it. This is such a tough question, but What have you learned from going through this experience?
Oh my God, so much. Definitely cannot fit it into a short time
I
span.
know,
You know?
I know.
But if I were to say what I learned from all this, because I've been to the bottom with this, I've been to the darkest parts that that humans can imagine with something like this, and I've experienced that pain, even of my own making. But I've also, like you said, I've been able to turn it around. I've been able to take a real look at it and face it, right, and grow from that and heal with that. And in fact, that this instance, this experience in my life, right, is no longer a burden. It's no longer a scar. This has become a beautiful healing for me, a point that I can share my experience and my hope and my strength with other people that need it, right? Especially with what's going on right now.
That is
that
is amazing, because you turn this entire tragedy and you just inverted it. You turned it on its head, and I'm sure that's what your father would have wanted. I've got to ask you one more question. What would 33-year-old Andrew Bird tell 13-year-old Andrew?
Oh, well, oh man. If I was standing next to me at 13 years old, the first thing I would do was embrace my 13-year-old self, right? And I would tell myself, this had to happen this way, right? This just had to happen this way. And there's nothing you can do to control this. There's nothing you can do to change this. But the most important thing that you can do with this is respond appropriately, right? With strength, with love, with hope, and embrace your family. Get your mother close, get your sister close. And I mean, most of all, look at this as something to grow from, right? Feel the feelings, right? But grow from it, right?
Yeah, beautifully put. Andrew Bird, thank you. Please tell your mother hello. Give her our best. She was absolute grace in the most dire circumstance. Your sister as well. And
Certainly.
Thank you for sharing your experience on this, and I wish you well.
Of course. Thanks, John.
It's great to see you. Andrew Bird.
You too.
We're back in a moment on Newsmaker Saturday. Another story from a boy who was 9 years old that day. His amazing journey, as well as we talk to family survivors of 9/11 20 years later. Back in a minute. As we continue to remember 9/11 20 years later, Matt Bocchi was a 9-year-old when his father was killed in Trade Center 1 when the plane hit the tower a little after 9 o'clock in the morning on September 11th, 2001. Matt is the author of Sway, which chronicles his journey of healing. Matt joins us now. Matt, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You were 9 years old. Your father worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, I think on the 105th floor. Can you recall that morning and what you learned and how you first learned of what happened?
That morning was that quintessential late summer morning. I remember it being so beautiful. And what was really perplexing to me more than anything was the fact that I was kept in school after we were told the news that a plane had hit our dad's building, and other kids in my school and in my grade were being pulled out one by one. I found it extremely odd that we were, and I'm referring to my brother and I, as the only ones who were still in school.
Did you know, Matt, that it was a jet, a passenger jet that had hit the tower? Because the early reports were it might have been a small plane, which had happened before, by the way, at World Trade back in, I think, the 50s or 60s. Do you remember kind of the moment where you thought, oh, this is really serious?
So I actually did not know it was a jet initially. And my first instinct actually as a kid was that, yeah, it was a small plane. And then when I got home that day and I saw the footage, it wasn't too hard for me to grasp that it was a bigger plane because I saw how big that hole was. And even on TV, it looked so small in a way. But if you knew the World Trade Center like I did, I had been there multiple times, you knew it was an airliner. So. Right.
And I misspoke. It was a passenger, a small plane that hit the Empire State Building, I believe, back in the 50s, I believe. So that was kind of the point of reference. Nothing ever hit the Trade Center before
Right.
9/11. As a 9-year-old, how did you process what you had seen? I mean, you knew your father worked there. In fact, it might be worth telling the story. A year earlier, when you're 8 years old, you went up and visited your dad and went up there to visit where his offices were. And your father, curiously, had a fear of heights, and there he is, 1,200 feet above ground.
Yeah, so my dad actually ushered my brother and I. We were there for the Christmas party that was held at Windows on the World, and we went to his office, and he told us to go towards the window and told us to look down and asked if we could feel it. And he was referring to the slight swaying of the building. And that title, Sway, for my book is a double meaning in many ways, as it also alludes to the life that I was about to live and the path that I was going to go down, and the fact that luckily enough, I was able to straighten myself out after tumultuous bending and swaying in life.
Yeah, I know you've been through it, through a lot of addiction and issues. You've come out the other side of it, which is hats off to you, because the journey has been incredible. When your father was in that building and you knew he was in there and you knew roughly where the plane hit, did you assume that he died immediately, or what was your feeling, and what was your mom telling you at the time?
I was under the assumption, knowing my dad and how resourceful he was, I thought that he was going to be able to get out of there. And my mom was holding on to that same hope as well. He had called her and actually pretty much said goodbye, but she still held on to the belief that he somehow got out of there. One of my uncles, her first cousin, when he came home from downtown that day, he said to my mom, Michelle, we just hope that we can find him. You know, he knew he didn't get out of there. But I still held on to that belief, and maybe in many ways I was naive. I thought that my dad would defy all odds and be able to get out of there.
So after the impact, he called your mom. He was still alive after the impact, which I think was around the 92nd floor. Am I close?
Yeah, I think it was 92nd to like 99, roughly.
Right, and so he was above that. My initial thought that morning when I saw pictures and I knew what was happening, I would have gone to the roof. Do you think he might have done that to get air?
I think that from what I was told from a collection of stories of close colleagues of his, and the fact that we were still so close to their families, I think some of them did try to go up there, but the roof was locked. And then I think they tried to figure out other ways to get out of there.
You made it. Even as a young man, you became obsessed with trying to figure out what happened to your father in the ensuing years. You went through painstaking research to try to figure this out. Did you get any answers?
I eventually got the answers, and they weren't I mean, I guess now I can reflect back and say I'm grateful that I have them. They weren't that answer, I guess, that I was looking for initially, which was wondering, well, I don't want to say hoping, but being under the impression that he may have jumped. I was told that he was, and that was a lie told to me. But I found out the truth years later, and it took many years of heartbreak and suffering to get to that point. But yes, as you said, I did look at the images and the footage, and it was a rough few years in those in the aftermath.
What did happen?
So I looked at images of people jumping from the building, videos and pictures. And I had an uncle through marriage who essentially used my vulnerability and my innocence, my remaining innocence, and told me that my dad did jump because he knew how much finding out the truth meant to me. And being under the impression that him jumping was a strong possibility, he lied to me as a way to sexually abuse me. And that's exactly what happened.
This is another struggle you went through, and it's chronicled in the book.
Yes, correct.
Matt, when you look back on what you've been through, can you at all articulate what that event meant to reshaping your life?
Fundamentally, it changed me as a person. Little did I know that on September 12th, I'd wake up a totally different person, and I would only continue to change in the next few years. And really, in the last 20 years, I've changed immensely. In many ways, I don't let 9/11 define me as a person anymore, but it certainly has shaped my life, and it has shaped the person I become today. And I can proudly say now that I'm using the loss of my father and the things that I went through and the heartbreak that I endured as a means to bring positivity into this world and hopefully spread a message of resilience and hope, and that people can know that you can pull yourself out of deep despair and struggle.
I want to go back to a couple of dates. One of them is May 2nd, 2011, when Osama bin Laden was killed. Did you get any, and I've asked people who've lost people in 9/11, did you get any relief at all from that moment when you found out bin Laden had been killed?
So I was a freshman in college, and I vividly remember where I was in that moment. I was in my buddy's dorm room, and we were just hanging out, drinking beers and stuff like that. And the news came on the TV, and I remember everyone just throughout the whole entire dormitory cheering and screaming and chanting USA chants and stuff like that. And I removed myself actually from the situation. I went to Villanova, and I walked across the street to the chapel, and I sat in there and I prayed. And it was just a moment of reflection for me, because listen, at the end of the day, Osama bin Laden being killed in some ways was a relief, but it didn't take away the pain. And although he was brought to justice in some regard, it didn't bring my dad back, and that's something that I knew would always be the case.
Matt, when you look at the totality of what happened and the lives changed on that day, you had other people close to you in your community, not in your exact town, but you had other people you knew who had lost people in the towers, right?
Yes.
Did that give you any solace to have somebody to kind of talk to?
Yeah, one of my best friends also lost his dad in 9/11, and although our stories are different in many ways, and he certainly wasn't curious like I was about trying to find out more to what happened to his dad, I definitely can find some solace in the fact that we have that bond and we can talk about it, and we know what we went through together. Our moms are in the same support group, and so in many ways it's symbolic because we've all come out on the other side 20 years later. But it is extremely special to me that I have that bond with someone and that I can talk to them at any point and just get some stuff off my chest that maybe the average person wouldn't understand.
Matt, you said your dad called your mom that day. Do you believe he just died in the collapse? He could not get out of the building?
So that was the story that was told by the medical examiner to my mom. We were lucky enough that we had that call, but they found my dad very quickly, and that was what they told her, that he was in the staircase, presumably, and alive one moment and gone the next. And they were under the impression he most likely died when the building collapsed. Regardless of that, I do believe that my dad accepted his fate, and he had peace in that moment when he called her, and he knew everything was going to be okay.
Did you ever get any remains of your father?
Yes, they found him 3 days later.
They did?
Yes.
A lot of families didn't get that kind of, and I hate the word closure. I detest that word. I'm sorry I'm using it now. But they got, you got an answer, a definitive answer.
We got an answer, and we got we got some of his personal belongings back. And to say that does provide me with some sort of closure is certainly accurate. And it's just still, it's so unfathomable at times, I really, I am very fortunate and grateful that we had something to bury.
Matt, a final thing. What would 29-year-old Matt Bocchi say to 9-year-old Matt Bocchi? What advice would you give that kid?
I would say that it may not seem like it in this time, but everything will be okay. And it may not be okay right now, but eventually it will all work out the way it's supposed to.
Matt Bocchi, the book is called Sway. You can get it on Amazon, any bookseller. Matt, I sure appreciate you spending some time with us, and we feel your loss.
Thank you so much for having me. Doesn't mean a lot.
Thank you, Matt. Back in a minute. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Newsmaker Saturday. I hope you got something out of that. I certainly did. We'll see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.